Action!
What is up, guys?
Hey guys, we have an awesome video for you today.
Yes.
We are breaking down a recent book by Lewis Howes. He's an author, he's got a podcast that's really popular. He has recently written, his new book is called The Mask of Masculinity. And Fraser got it on Audible, we listened to it, and it was a really awesome book. We highly recommend anyone get it, read it, you'll learn a lot from it in different aspects. But we wanted to break down one thing that we found was kind of a missing link from the book.
I read this book. It really related to me being a former butcher, guys. You know, I came from that place where I was a butcher. I lived a very different life than I do now as a vegan nutritionist. And reading Lewis's book, hearing his vulnerability, you know, I loved that about the book. I loved the fact that he had broken down these different concepts and these paradigms and these facades and these veils that we all wear as a form of protection, as a form to keep our vulnerability away from you know, the prying eyes of society, away from being hurt and things like that.
It's like a false representation of masculinity.
Yeah, and so I was reading this book, and it was funny because I had a conversation with a good friend, and he's vegan as well, and we were talking about this book and how we were talking about gender roles and masculinity around veganism, and to do with that sort of that idea that veganism seems to be more of a feminine sort of paradigm. And so Lewis's book actually came into discussion, and I said, you know, the irony and the thing that I thought about was that Lewis is talking about all these different masks. And I feel like he missed one. He missed a huge one in the sense that there is this mask that most of society wears that we call the meat-eating mask. And I want to take some of Lewis's masks that he talks about in his book, the aggressive mask, the alpha mask, and the know-it-all mask, and quote him directly from his book, and then explain how the meat-eating mask manifests itself in the form of those different protection mechanisms.
It's interesting because it's like he's halfway there. Like he's made a lot of realizations with these masks that he names, but he's missing that the meat-eating mask is kind of a link between several of the masks he mentions, and the meat-eating behavior is both a cause of some of the behaviors of these masks he talks about, and also a manifestation of some of these masks and behaviors that he mentions in his book.
And so the first mask is the aggressive mask, and I will quote Lewis from his book for you now. Men are aggressive. It is in their nature. They are violent and tough, and they never back down. When they see something they want, they take it. Men hate. Men have enemies. Men get into fights. Of course they have tempers. Of course they break things. They are hunters, not gatherers. It's what men do. A man who thinks otherwise is not a man and is responsible for the weakening of the world. So that was basically his description, or his summary for the aggressive mask. And I want to touch on one piece of that he hit on. And it was, they are the hunters, not the gatherers. It's what men do. So straight away there, he's referring to this aggressive mask, this paradigm around what it means to be a man, and the fact that men have to be hyper aggressive. They have to be strong and violent and ruthless and empathetic, because that's ultimately what makes them masculine, right?
And he makes the connection that men are the hunters, that is the aggressive personality, that is the aggressive behavior. Women are the nurturers, and women take care of their children, and back in the day, women were the original farmers. Women, when they were just basically small gardens, women tended to that. Women do the nurturing of the food. They take care of the food that grows and gives back in a way, and men have the aggression and the hunting. But what I thought was so funny about this, and the most important part of this summary to me, was the shortest part. The little piece of sentence where he says, it's what men do. Like, basically, there's not really a reason for it. It's just what we're supposed to do. It's what is accepted. It's what we're told and what we're taught from the day we pop out of the womb. That is our culture.
Think of the aggressive mask as a protection, a survival mechanism that has helped humans basically get to the point where we're at now. If we didn't have some of these paradigms in place, would we have survived? And so, what I mean by that is when you look back in our early human history, it was being the man, being typically the physically larger and stronger sex. It was our role at the time to go out and find food in terms of hunting and chasing down these animals, being stronger, being violent to basically sustain life. And so, from an evolutionary perspective, those paradigms, those social constructs, they kept us alive at a certain point in time. It's no mistake that the brain recognizes things that keep us alive and things that help us procreate, and it basically integrates them into our mind and our behaviors and our instinct. And so when you look at that as our past, it's no surprise that we still have those same types of programming and conditioning. It's just manifested itself in modern day society with what we see now in terms of this hyper aggressive world that we live in, with a lot of men who are disconnected to where their food is coming from, and people in general. And I want to put that forward is that when I worked in a butchery and I was a butcher, 99% of the people who worked in there were men, and it was such a hyper inflated, sort of hyper masculine, hyper aggressive environment to be in. All the men that worked in those places tended to be very aggressive, and I don't think it was by any coincidence that that type of environment definitely perpetuates and breeds that type of mindset in people, and also draws those types of people in from the get-go, because it takes a certain type of person to want to work in an environment like that to start with. And then I think when you get all those people around each other, it just manifests and it amplifies itself.
Another thing that Lewis points out in his little summary is he says men are aggressive, it's their nature. And I do think, like Fraser touched on, back hundreds and thousands of years ago, it was our nature because it was what we had to do to survive. But that's not the case anymore. We've evolved so much from that point that now I feel like this aggressive mask is more nurtured now more than anything. I think it's because there's that inkling of the nature that men used to do this to survive, and because of that, men taught it through their generation. So they taught the young children, this is what you have to do.
This is what valuable.
And so now we continue to teach young boys that, even though there's not a need for it anymore. It doesn't serve us in a positive way. We have so much intelligence now, and we've evolved to so many other levels that we have plant-based foods in the grocery stores. People are creating meat-like products so without having to incorporate any aggression, any harm to another living being. So there's no need, there's no nature for the aggression at this point. Now it's just being nurtured out of habit.
So basically, in summary, for the aggressive mask, I think Lewis did a really good job explaining a lot of the challenges that we see in society today in terms of the walls that people put up in general, the aggression that you see from people to other people. And one of the last things I wanted to tie into is that when you come from a place where you've been conditioned to think that you're the hunter, not the gatherer, that you need to be aggressive, it's what men do, they have tempers, they fight, that when we condition ourselves to do that to animals on such a systemic, chronic basis, it really does desensitize us all and detach us from feeling anything towards other human beings. And part of this aggressive mask, I think, in many ways, is it stems over into the type of violence and raping and murdering and wars that you see in the world, that because we've conditioned ourselves to be so desensitized to animal suffering, regarding eating animals, the way they're processed, the way they suffer, that we've detached ourselves so much, and this aggressive mask is in place to the point that we don't even see compassion towards other people anymore. And so I think it transcends over from not just impacting animal suffering, but then it teaches us how to detach ourselves from feeling the suffering from other people too. I think that the new evolution of that concept is really seeing strength and compassion. And I want to reach out to Lewis and say to question that paradigm within himself. And for anyone watching this who's not vegan yet, to question that paradigm within yourself and understand that strength through compassion is ultimately like real strength, and breaking down those old paradigms, especially things like the aggressive mask, where Lauren was saying it's basically taught through culture and generations that these things are important because it's what kept us alive at a certain point in time. When in modern day society now, there really is no relevance for it. And in fact, it's probably a huge inhibiting factor to our own spiritual and internal growth. So
I think it definitely takes more strength to question
Yeah.
what is the society's norms, to question what you've always been taught, to question maybe what the majority does. It takes more strength to stand up against that, to ask questions, than it does to just follow the herd.
Yeah. So the second mask, guys, that Lewis talked about in his book, The Mask of Masculinity, is the alpha mask. So the first one was the aggressive mask. The second one, the alpha mask, and I want to read this to you directly from Lewis's book. So he says here, at the most basic level, men believe that there are two types of men, alphas and betas, winners and losers. No man can stand to be the latter. So a man must dominate, one up and win everything. A man can't even defer. As a man, he must be in control, and he can't ever do anything a beta or a woman would do. So that's the alpha mask as described by Lewis. So what would you say to that?
What would I say to it? Considering you just ended the description with, I wouldn't do anything a woman would do.
Yeah.
So that would fire up a woman right there. I think it's funny that men have, and I think, again, it's something that is more being nurtured, it's being taught more than anything, that men are superior, men have to hold this certain position, they have to act a certain way, they have to put out a certain aura and this role. But and I love this one because it's what our name is. It's our brand, Evolving Alpha. It's changing that perception
Evolving
of
the
what
term alpha.
Alpha means.
Right.
Alpha is not about domination and hurting other people. Alpha is about being a leader, being a leadership role. When I think about like an alpha wolf in a pack, I think of that's the one that everyone else looks to for leadership. That's the one that they look to and say, what are we doing now? Like, what do we do now in a tough situation? That's what an alpha is.
And so you look at that main part of that description, so a man must dominate. And you look at that across the board in terms of raping and stealing and the way we consume animals and the way we see animals and the way we think that we're entitled to do those things because we're at the top of the food chain. It's that whole idea of that because we can dominate, therefore we should be entitled to do what we want. And that's just another conditioned paradigm. A really good story that someone shared with me was that in ancient cultures, think about it like this, that if you're at the top of the food chain and you dominate and you consume those animals, in theory, they believe that you were consuming their strength and their soul. What they didn't think about, and what they don't think about even today, is that you also consume their fear and suffering and anxiety, especially in conventional factory farming environments that we see today across the board. There is so much fear, there's so much anxiety within these animals. If you feel like you're consuming that energy, you're ultimately consuming that anxiety and fear. And you can see that across society as a whole, with the amount of people who have anxiety, depression, challenges with aggression, so much conflict. It's no surprise that we basically are what we eat.
And have you noticed that hundreds and thousands of years ago, when men were truly hunting to survive, they were hunting these strong wild animals. And so they think, that's where that kind of idea comes from, that you are consuming their strength and their soul. But nowadays, we don't do that. We are dominating and controlling these weaker animals in a factory farming situation.
We're not factory farming bears and lions.
No, we're talking
the weakest
cows, chickens, pigs, animals that even in the wild are not going out and attacking people, are not hurting people.
They're as docile as dogs.
They're trusting their caretakers, and all they're doing is being used and abused and then ultimately slaughtered. And so you're not consuming a strong soul at that point. You're consuming fear and anxiety and all of the suffering that they've endured for their entire life.
And I think Lauren brings up a really good point that conventionally all the animals that we dominate through the alpha mask are seemingly very defenseless. Cows, sheep, chickens, pigs, they are not aggressive in nature, yet we've chosen to dominate them by wearing this alpha mask, thinking that because we are more intelligent, that somehow gives us a right to do what we want with them. And you think about this in history, whether it's black slavery or women's inability to vote at one point in time. There's these things in our human history that repeat themselves. And I know that you guys will get this. So think about it. Like, there was a point in time where owning an African American slave was illegal. It was legal to do that, and it was normal to do that. Now, it wasn't moral, but it was legal and it was normal. Because we could dominate them. And it's the same with women not being able to vote. Being the weakest sex, the men felt they could dominate them. Therefore, they could dictate and choose how they wanted to treat them and the rights that they have. It's that same domination paradigm. It's just manifesting itself with a voiceless being, the animals. And I think that the alpha mask is a huge one regarding the way we see animals, because until we can look in their eyes, and myself as a former butcher, I'm saying this, until we can look in their eyes and see a reflection of ourselves in them, we're going to continue to allow them to suffer, and ultimately it's going to lead to our own suffering as well.
And if you think that dominating and using and hurting someone, a being who is weaker than you, somehow proves your strength, that is completely delusional. It shows no strength to dominate someone who is weaker than you. It takes ultimately more strength to protect those within you. It shows more strength to stand up against the aggressive types of people and to protect those that are maybe weaker than you or that don't have a voice like animals do, to say, this is wrong, this hurts, I don't want to be killed and slaughtered.
And also, I think a big barrier to a lot of people, especially men, regarding veganism is that, like Lewis said in his quote, the man must be in control. He can't ever do anything a beta or a woman would do. And I think there's a associated femininity and a vulnerability around the idea of veganism because it comes from more of a nurturing concept. And that's why I think predominantly a lot of people within the vegan movement are women to begin with, because they're already on that wavelength of nurturing and gathering where they understand, it resonates with them on a deeper level. And so a lot of men see veganism and plant-based eating as a beta state or as something a woman would do, and that alpha mask blocks them from contemplating change. And what I put forward to people is that ultimate alpha leadership and ultimate alpha strength is really recognizing that you have that mask on in the first place, and then choosing that road less traveled, choosing the one that the minority is in because you know it's moral and right. And ultimately, that's why I chose this path, because I recognized that it resonated with me as a compassionate person, as someone who's sharing my own vulnerabilities about my mental health challenges in my life, coming from bipolar disorder, severe social anxiety, ADHD, drug addiction, alcohol abuse, and a butcher. And shedding those things and recognizing that true strength lies in your own evolution, which typically lies in shedding things like the alpha mask and the aggressive mask, which are an inherent part of the meat-eating mask. And the third mask from Lewis's book that we chose to read, and remember, there's other masks, and honestly, all of them actually pertain to the meat eating mask in some capacity, but we felt that these were the most poignant three. I want to read you the last excerpt in terms of the mask that we feel fits the most, and it is the know-it-all mask. So he says here, a man is not only physically dominant, but intellectually dominant too. If you don't understand why that is, a man is happy to explain it to you. Along with all the other subjects he's an expert at in too. He went to a top school, he watches all the news, and he knows all the answers. He certainly doesn't need yours or anyone else's help. He knows it all. Now,
you know what I think is funny that I just caught when you read it, and I mean, we've read over this multiple times already, but when you said, you know, all of the subjects he's an expert in, he went to school, to the top schools, he watches the news, and I just realized those are all things where you're just being told by someone else
what truth
to believe.
Yeah.
So it's so funny because they're like, I know it all, but you've just been told it all by somebody else at some point.
It's like you got downloaded an operating system to run on that you think is your own, but really it's just a collection of opinions from people in a position of influence, and they guide your thinking. And it's hard to step away from that and see that and recognize that a lot of the things I think I'm choosing are actually predetermined programming that I'm running on too.
It's like, so these men who think they're so strong and alpha and masculine, it's like you've just been taken advantage of when you were a little boy, and even as adults, you've been taken advantage of by those who see themselves as alpha over you, and they've taught you what to believe, and you've never had the internal strength to question that.
And the thing that I want to put forward to, you know, when Lewis talks about this know-it-all mask, this is typically the one that you're going to find happens the most online in regards to veganism. So when you bring up the fact that you want to go vegan, or you're curious about veganism, or you may even bring up the meat eating mask, for example, you're going to have people come at you, and they're going to all of a sudden become nutritionists, human biologists, molecular biologists, philosophers, philanthropists. You know, they're going to come out of the woodwork and be experts in everything. And you have to recognize that this mask that Lewis talks about is often a defense mechanism to protect people from their own truth, from inherently what they know is right morally. So they'll have these logical justifications for why they do things that are interlaced with addiction and this nostalgia around foods and recipes that your family's made and things like that. And logically, you know that it's fundamentally probably not moral, but you have the know-it-all mask as a way to justify what you're doing. And so I see that across the board, and I know that I was in that position as a former butcher and someone who ate a lot of meat on a daily basis, that I had to see that and step away from it and recognize that maybe wisdom and maybe maturity and maybe intellect is in recognizing that you know very little.
And that's especially, you know, applies to us because we were fitness trainers, nutritionists.
We preached a different paradigm
before we were vegan. And so we don't speak to you from this high authority place of, oh, look how smart we are and we've never been like what we're talking about. We're saying we've been there and we opened our mind and we went through the process of change and we started to question, and now we're out the other side.
So fundamentally, I feel like with the know-it-all mask, it is a defense mechanism for a lot of people, a lot of men, that protects them from really recognizing that they know very little, that they don't have a lot of life figured out, that they're uncertain about a lot of things. And I think it's like a bridging mask to help them feel like they have a sense of direction in their life. And I recognize that when it comes to veganism, there's so many people who will come forward and say things about it from no experience of their own. And this is just that mask in place. So this mask that Lewis breaks down is, in fact, a mask that non-vegans will wear as a way to prevent themselves from even contemplating changing into the vegan lifestyle. I want to share a quick funny story with you. There was a guy recently at a fitness expo that we were just at, and we were setting up our vegan bodybuilding and fitness booth. And this guy was an older gentleman, had obviously been in the powerlifting circles for a while, looked like he'd kind of trained. He wasn't in great shape, but he looked like he had been in the gym and stuff, and he was a supplement company owner. He came over to us and he kind of looked at the banner and looked at us and had this funny look on his face, and he smirked and he's like, "You're not vegan." Like, and he just persisted to then go on this full on diatribe about nutrition and supplementation and gut health and all these a myriad of different things. It was like a brain dump, and I felt like this was the know-it-all mask coming out as a defense mechanism against the fact that here we were as vegans setting up our booth, just doing our own thing, and this mask came to the surface like a defense mechanism. And I sat down with Lauren later and I questioned. I was like, why was this guy needing to explain himself so aggressively and kind of confront me about not being vegan or this, that, and the other, and go down all these diatribes about different supplements and things. And I recognized that because he was a supplement owner and he thought there was a lot of value in these different animal-based supplements that he was promoting and creating, that veganism and vegan bodybuilding and people who are vegan who don't use his supplements, who he thinks are important and he thinks are valuable, all of a sudden somehow delegitimize the importance of what he does. It delegitimizes the necessity for his supplements to begin with, because we don't even use them, and we've got a result that he probably aspires other people to get without his stuff. So straight away I recognized that his know-it-all mask was really a defense mechanism to basically make himself feel like what he was doing with his business and with his goals and with his dreams was somehow important. And our results was a direct conflict with that paradigm. And this is that know-it-all mask coming to the surface. And very often what I recognize with a lot of men who have this mask towards veganism is typically they're also very close to change. Because if they were completely apathetic and did not care about the stuff at all, they wouldn't even react. There would be no reaction. But because there is such an adverse reaction, you know that it's triggering something within their subconscious mind, something within themselves that's saying, there's a disconnect here. There's a cognitive dissonance here going on, where what I truly believe in my heart regarding peace or compassion or strength, or I love pet animals, I love my dog and cat, yet I'm eating pigs and cows. There's a conflict there, and they start to feel it, and that's when these masks come to the surface.
And what's interesting is all of these masks that we've talked about, the alpha mask, the aggressive mask, the know-it-all mask, in Lewis's book, the whole book is about bringing awareness to these masks and showing that they're really just facades. They're just facades of making men feel masculine. So, it's like Lewis is so close to making that connection, because he's made the connection with all the masks as far as these behaviors are really just these made up things that we're wearing
to protect something within
right.
us. Yeah.
But then he hasn't made that connection that eating animals and dominating animals is part of these masks.
It's still residue. Even if you shared a huge part of these masks through your own journey, there's still residue, and there's still part of that mask clinging on if you're consuming animals, because you've been indoctrinated into a society and a world where aggression against weaker beings, to use them as food, dairy, cheese, eggs, leather, whatever products, is normal and necessary. You've been conditioned to think that being most intellectual means that you're the most dominant, which means that you are entitled to do what you want with any other being. We see that in slavery. We see that in women not being able to vote at some point. We see that across the board, repeating itself in history. This time, it's still repeating itself with the way that we treat and use animals. And the last one is a know-it-all mask. When you find that you need to justify or explain or defend what you're doing, that typically means that you're closer to change than you realize. And my challenge to Lewis is to look at his amazing work that he's done and also question his beliefs around these things. And is there residue of these masks intact that are enabling this meat-eating mask to remain intact. Because I truly feel like once you break through that mask, a massive consciousness expansion happens, and you start to see paradigms and connections with everything regarding politics, religion, awareness, spirituality across the board. Everything just starts to make much more sense, and it's a truly humbling experience when you can shed that mask and then you can learn that, oh my God, for my entire life I was wearing this thing I never even saw. I used to post things on Facebook about getting upset about dogs being abused, or in Asian cultures how they ate dogs and cats. That would really upset me. And here I was eating pigs and chickens and cows on a daily basis. I was doing the very thing that I was so strongly opposed to, and it's because this meat-eating mask was so intact, stuck to my face, I couldn't see the forest for the trees.
So Lewis, is saying in his book, he recognizes that aggression is a mask, and it's not something that we need to or should be doing. But he hasn't made the connection yet that eating animals is a form of aggression. It's a playing out of aggression. Whether you are killing the animals yourselves or whether you're paying someone else to do it, it is a manifestation of that aggression. Same thing with the alpha mask. He recognizes and discusses in his book that acting alpha and dominating is a facade. It's silly, it's unnecessary, and it doesn't make you masculine. It doesn't make you a man to do those things. But he hasn't yet connected that eating animals is dominating them. He probably does recognize that, like, domination of women that happens, in domestic abuse, with rape, things like that, we're dominating a weaker sex.
Or other racial
he thinks that's
dominations
wrong,
and things.
but he hasn't recognized that the same thing we do with another sex, we do with other species as well, and it's also wrong. And he recognizes that being a know-it-all is a mask. And he's very good at this one as far as being aware to this, because he's very much a learner, and he's always asking people and learning from other people, whether they be people that he thinks are above him or more intelligent than him, or people who aren't necessarily, don't have any kind of expertise above him, but he still knows that there's something he can learn from them. So I think he's very aware of this one. It's just more so pointing out to you guys, this is something that people use as a defense mechanism against hearing the things that we're pointing out about all the masks, and especially about the eating mask.
It's why they won't watch documentaries like Earthlings or Cowspiracy, or watch slaughterhouse videos, or why they will reject vegan nutrition and things like that, because that mask comes to the surface and it blocks you from even wanting to see and contemplate those things. But I challenge you, typically the things we're avoiding are typically the things we need to be doing. It's that compass. It's pointing us in the direction of the path we should ultimately be pursuing. So guys, let us know if you found this video informative regarding Lewis Howes's book, The Mask of Masculinity, with his aggressive mask, his alpha mask, and his know-it-all mask. Let us know what you think. Do you see the meat-eating mask paradigm within these three? Which one do you think is the most prominent one? Can you think of any scenarios in your own life with people you know, or situations that you've seen where these masks come to play regarding the meat-eating mask? Do you have any messages for Lewis? Do you have anything that you would like to say to him and hope that he will see this and it will resonate with him, and all this amazing work that he's put in to dismantle these shields that so many men carry, and to carry your vulnerability as a strength, that he can take that concept to the next level and then contemplate this idea of veganism, which is ultimate strength in reality, and the full dismantling of many of these masks that he talks about in his amazing book.
And I hope that his book will really help a lot of other people as well break down the masks and the facades and be open to more of their vulnerability, and which is really a strength. And I think if people can read this book and get just the principles and the ideas that Lewis talks about, they would then be more open towards veganism. And so I hope that it will start to change the culture in general, even if it's just one step at a time.
And guys, if you like this video, don't forget to hit like, subscribe. We are going to come out with tons more video content like this across the board regarding veganism, fitness, health, nutrition, training, mindset, all of those things. So subscribe, share this video if you found it informative or important or value adding, and let's get this message out there about the meat eating mask paradigm that most people need to break through in order to reach veganism.